Chapter 2 Ground Zero Baby. The birth of Mortgage Backed Securities did just change Wall Street and she says it changed the mortgage business on Main Street to mortgage origination, that is, the act of making a loan to someone who wants to buy a home had always been the province of the banks and the S&Ls, which relied on savings and checking accounts to fund the loans. Securitization modified that business model. Instead, securitization itself became the essential form of funding, which meant in turn that all kinds of new mortgage companies could be formed, companies that competed with banks and S&Ls for mortgage customers, yet operated outside the banking system and were therefore largely unregulated. Not surprisingly, these new companies were run by mates who were, were worlds apart from the local businessmen who ran the nation. In S&L and banks, they were hard-working and entrepreneurial and intensely ambitious natural salesmen who found in the changing mortgage market a way to make their mark in American business. Some of them may have genuinely carried um, who found in the changing mortgage market a way to make their mark in American business. Some of them may have genially cared about putting people in homes. All of them cared about getting rich. None of them remotely resembled George Bailey. Mm, these new mortgage originators were of two distinct breeds, um, unless at first. Mm, One set of companies originated fairly start loans to people with good credit, which they sold to Fannie and Freddie. Countries Financial was a good example of that kid of company. The second group had very different roots. They grew out of one's now has hard money lending to poor people. Primarily, hard money refers to the large down um, payments its customers had to make even for a basic item such as refrigeration. These new companies moving hard money lending into the mortgage market, making loans that will eventually become now as subprime. They couldn't sell to the because for a long time the Golden Boys song Rise Mortgage on the other lines. Hence, this influx of new lenders created exactly what Wall Street had been searching for: mortgage product in cold security with Fannie and Freddie. There is much irony in the fact that countrywide financial began life in that Spitz group of companies since it would later become the mortgage origination most closely associated with the excesses of the supreme business. But it's true. Its founder and CEO, a smart, aggressive bulldog of a man named Angelo Mosillo. There might have been another reason for Mosillo's returning dismal of meeting City Group. City represent the establishment Mozilla Brownsburn and Furman Educate spent his life both waiting to be the establishment and harboring a burning represent toward it. I run into these guys on, on Wall Street has the time who think they're something special because they went to Ivy schools. He once told a New York Times reporter, "We're always underestimate. I must say it bothered me when I was younger. Mm, they're snobbery and they're looking down on us when he was starting out. The business was Lily White. Mozill's former partner Howard Levis recalls Mozilla was an extremely dark-skinned Italian American and very sensitive about that heritage. He once told a college about returning from his honeymoon with his new life um, facilities and stopping in Virginia Beach. On the way home, they went into a restaurant to have dinner. We don't serve colored. The waiter said, Italian. Mozilla replied, "That's why they all said the waiter. Born in one night, 1038, Mozilla was the son of a butcher who had emigrated from Italy as a young man. The Mozilla's life in the rental flat saw my dad strongly high his life. Mozilla later explained he lived to be 56 and died of a heart attack. Mozilla's uncle, who worked for an insurance company, had the only white-collar job in the family. John Angelo worked for his father until he was old enough to ask his uncle to help him find a job. At 14, he became a messenger for a small Manhattan mortgage company. That's when Mozilla met Levin, who today is president of ARC's Commercial Mortgage Company, a subsidiary of MPNC Financial, the Pittsburgh-based bank. We were very anxious to be successful, says Levin. Angelo in particular, this was our break. By the time he graduated from high school, Mozilla had worked in every part of the company, and he continued to work there while attending for them in 1960. The same year Mozilla graduated from college. The company merged with a Langer company, Unit Mortgage Service Company, which was based in Virginia and run by a man named David Loeb. Thought also from the Bronx, Loeb could not have been more different from Mozilo. His parents were into ballet and opera. Mozilo later recalled he was 15 years older, and I was frightened to death of him. But Loeb took a liking to Mozilo, to his scrappiness and ambitions. Mozilo enrolled in night business school at New York University, but dropped out when Leop decided to send him to Orlando, Florida. He was 23 years old. Brevard Country, on the coast not far from Orlando, was the perfect place to be in the housing business entirely. A few years earlier, the Soviet Union had launched the Sputnik satellite, and the space boom was on in the United States as America frantically tried to outdo its Cold War rival. Brevard Country included a small speck of land called Cape Canaveral. Space engineers flocked to the area, only to discover there was no place for them to live. As Mozilo would later tell the story to reporters, he remembered seeing people living in tents on the beach. Mozilla made a group of developers who hoped to build one of the first subdivisions in the country, but they needed money. Mozilla wanted his company to lend them what they needed to build the subdivision, which was a common tactic back then. Leib agreed, thought the tactic was not without risk. The money they loaned to the developers was more than the company was worth. Disaster struck. On the night before the grand opening, a hot storm swept out the area. When Mozilo arrived at the site, he later said he saw furniture stirring in water because the subdivision had been built in a basin. His heart sank, yet it turned out not to matter. People were so desperate for homes that the subdivision sold out anyway. In one night, 1068, Unit Mortgage Servicing was bought out. Lovett and Mozilo left to start their own business. Mozilo was 30 years old, but he had already had 16 years of experience in the industry. What was striking about this new venture was the sheer naked ambitions of it. Non-bank mortgage brokers and existing for a long time, but they were small and local niche players at best. Mozilla and Loeb had no intention of becoming niche players. They were going to be big, and they were going to be everywhere. The name of the company's site is all countrywide. They argued at first since Countrywide wasn't a bank and could gather deposits, the only way it could make loans was by getting a line of credit, call it a warehouse line from a bank um, or Wall Street firm or a group of investors tend to replenish its capital. It had to sell the mortgage in uh, originate both signs. The securitization market didn't exist yet. That mean they were longer limited to loans that could be insured by the Federal Housing Administration or Veterans Affairs, since those were the only loans Fannie and Freddie were allowed to buy. It wasn't much of a business. Loeb and Mozilla tried to raise money by selling stock on the New York Stock Exchange. They hoped they raised 3 million, but got only, according to Paul Moulu and Matthew Padilla in Chain of Blame, things got so bad. Mozilla later told reporters that he and Loeb had to lie everyone off and start again, but even as they were holding on by their fingertips, the massive change that would transform the mortgage business had begun. Rising interest rates were starting to kill the S&Ls. More important, not long after Countrywide was born, Fannie Mae was granted the right to buy conventional mortgage. Almost overnight, mortgage originators like Countrywide began to dominate the home lending business. From a steady start, the market share of non-bank mortgage companies rose to 89% by one 2018. Just 4 years later, it stood at an astonishing possible. Sometimes Mozilla never forgot. Husky once told the New York Times, if it wasn't for Tim Wells, who now they have us under the rules, Mozilla could sell only so-called conforming loans, thus that meets strict underwriting criteria. Loans were underwriting based on what was known in the business as the fair credit, compatibility, collateral, and character. If you had late payments on a previous mortgage and maybe any other debt, you didn't get a mortgage. The monthly payments for your home, the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance could exceed 33% of your monthly income, half of which was financed by Mozilla. It was the way he'd always done business.